The man who stood next to me at my wedding altar. The man who caught my boutonniere when it fell off my lapel 30 seconds before the ceremony. The man I trusted more than almost anyone on earth. He was feeding my wife ammunition to destroy me. And he was doing it while buying me beers and calling himself a neutral friend. Let me take you back to the beginning of the end. Not the end of my marriage. That had been coming for a while. And honestly, by the time my ex-wife and I decided to separate, we had reached something close to a mutual, almost civilized understanding. I know that sounds strange. Divorce is supposed to be war. But we had no kids together. We had a rough agreement on the house. And we were both tired. We just wanted out. Clean, quiet, finished. The end I'm talking about is the end of a friendship I had spent 17 years building. His name is Marcus. Marcus Briel. And if you have ever had a friend who positioned himself as the wise, steady center of your social universe, the guy everyone calls when there is a crisis, the guy who always seems to know exactly what to say, then you know the type. Marcus was that guy. He had been my best friend since our mid-20s, when we worked at the same mid-sized logistics company and spent our lunch breaks complaining about the same mediocre middle managers. He was the first person I called when I got engaged. He organized my bachelor trip. He stood next to me at the altar, and when he gave his speech at the reception, half the room cried. He was good at speeches. He was good at being exactly what the moment needed. That was his gift, and also, I would later understand, his entire strategy. The separation started in November. My ex-wife Claire and I had agreed to try mediation rather than lawyers, at least for the first round. We were splitting assets, figuring out the apartment situation, and trying to stay human beings to each other throughout the process. It was not warm, but it was functional. We had one mediator scheduled for January, a second session planned for February, and a rough timeline for everything to be resolved by spring. I told Marcus in early December. We met at a bar we had been going to for years, a place called the Copper Rail, with sticky menus and decent draft beer and a dartboard nobody ever actually used. I told him about the separation, explained the plan, said it was manageable. He listened, he nodded, he put his hand on my shoulder and said the exact right things. He said he was sorry, that he respected how I was handling it, that he was there for both of us but would not take sides. That last part, I replayed it later. Both of us would not take sides. I nodded and bought another round. The first sign was small enough that I almost missed it. About 2 weeks after that bar conversation, Claire and I had a phone call about the apartment valuation. She mentioned a figure, a specific number, a specific argument about market timing that I had only discussed with Marcus. I had sent him a voice note about it, actually, because I was processing out loud. And he was the person I processed things with. I had not told anyone else. Claire used that number almost verbatim, wrapped in slightly different language, as part of her argument for why she deserved a larger share of the equity. I paused on the phone. I said, "That is an interesting framing." She said, "It is just the reality of the market." I said, "Right." And then I sat very still for about 10 minutes after we hung up. I did not confront Marcus. I want to be clear about that. I did not call him and accuse him. I did not send an angry message. I had a feeling, but feelings are not evidence. And I had spent enough time in operational logistics to know that you do not act on a hunch when the stakes are high. You watch, you document, you wait. So I kept talking to Marcus. I kept meeting him at the Copper Rail. I kept being the version of myself he expected, processing, venting, asking for perspective. But I started being careful about what I shared. I started giving him specific, slightly wrong details. Not lies exactly, more like controlled inaccuracies. A wrong date here. A slightly inflated or deflated number there. Things that would be recognizable if they showed up somewhere else. And they did. In mid-December, Claire's tone in our emails shifted. She started referencing a timeline I had mentioned to Marcus. The wrong timeline. The one I had deliberately adjusted before telling him. She mentioned my financial situation using language that matched almost exactly a way I had described it to Marcus. And only to Marcus, with the subtle distortion I had introduced. I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder than anger. Recognition. I started going back through my emails. Marcus and I communicated a lot by email. Long, rambling threads about nothing in particular, interspersed with actual logistical content. I found 3 emails where I had shared real information about the separation process. The mediator's name, the rough structure of our asset split discussion, a question I had about the legal weight of a prenuptial addendum we had signed early in the marriage. I forwarded those emails to a separate private account I set up specifically for this purpose. Just copies. Just timestamps. Then I checked my calendar. Marcus and I used a shared calendar for social events, birthdays, group dinners, that kind of thing. An old habit from years back. I had never thought anything of it, but when I looked at it now, I noticed something. There were 2 entries in Marcus's personal calendar that had been accidentally shared with me. He had the visibility set wrong, a mistake, I assumed, because the entries were marked private, but I could see the titles. December 14th, lunch C. December 21st, coffee. C. Claire's initial. I took screenshots, I saved them. Then, in the first week of January, something happened that I had not planned for, but that turned out to be the most important piece of everything. Marcus sent me an email. A regular email, nothing suspicious on the surface. He was asking if I wanted to meet up before the new year. But attached to that email, apparently by accident, was a document. A Word document. He had probably meant to attach something else. Or maybe he had grabbed the wrong file from a recent folder. I do not know. But the document was titled, and I am not making this up, Settlement Notes, C. I opened it. It was 4 pages long. It was written in Marcus's voice, his particular cadence, and it was a detailed breakdown of what he believed Claire's strongest arguments were in the asset split. It referenced specific conversations I had had with him. It referenced my financial anxieties, my concerns about the timeline, my uncertainty about whether I had a strong legal position on the prenuptial addendum. It reframed everything I had told him in confidence, everything I had shared as a friend processing something hard, into strategic ammunition. There was a section titled Emotional Leverage. It listed things I had said about wanting to be fair, about not wanting the separation to become ugly, about how I would probably concede on certain points rather than drag things out. It listed these things as weaknesses to exploit. I read it twice. I closed my laptop. I went and made coffee. I want to tell you I was calm. I mostly was, but my hands were shaking slightly when I poured the water. And I stood at the kitchen window for a long time, watching the street below, and I felt something I can only describe as grief, mixed with a very specific, very cold clarity. He had been doing this the entire time. The lunches, the coffees, the careful positioning of himself as neutral, the hand on my shoulder at the copper rail, the right words at the right moment. It was all performance. I was a source. I was a file he was building. I did not reply to his email. I forwarded the attachment to my private account. I then screenshotted the email itself with the attachment visible in the thread. I saved everything in a folder I labeled simply January. A few days later, Marcus texted me. "Hey, accidentally sent you the wrong attachment in that last email. Just some old work notes. Ignore it. Did you see it?" I replied, "Nope, did not notice." "What did you mean to send?" He sent a recipe, an actual recipe for a slow-cooked lamb stew. "Happy New Year," he added. "Happy New Year," I replied. I let him believe the document had gone unread. I let him believe I was still exactly who he thought I was, a man in pain, slightly overwhelmed, trusting the wrong people, grateful for his steady presence. We met at the Copper Rail again in mid-January. He bought the first round, which was unusual. Marcus was generous in many ways, but rarely the first to the bar. He was warm, attentive, asked good questions. He was performing neutrality at a very high level. At one point he said, "I just want you to know I am not in anyone's corner here. I care about both of you. I want this to end well for everyone." I said, "That means a lot to me." I meant it in a different way than he thought. The mediation was scheduled for the last Thursday of January. The mediator's name was Dr. Petra Sohn, a woman in her 50s who had a small office near the city centre and a reputation for being thorough and direct. Claire and I had agreed on her together, which was one of the few things we had agreed on easily. I had requested that the session include a brief opening statement from each party about their understanding of the current situation and any concerns about the process. Dr. Sohn had agreed this was reasonable. It was not a standard part of her format, but she was flexible. I had also told Marcus about the mediation date. I told him it was the following week, on a Wednesday. Not Thursday. Wednesday. On Tuesday evening, I got a text from Marcus. "Hey, good luck tomorrow. You have got this. Let me know how it goes." There it was. The wrong day. Confirmed. He had not heard the date from Claire or from Dr. Sohn's office. He had heard it from me, the controlled version, the one I had fed him deliberately. That text was the last piece I needed. Thursday morning, I arrived at Dr. Sohn's office early. I had a folder with me. Inside the folder were printed copies of the forwarded emails, the calendar screenshots, and a printed copy of the settlement notes document. All 4 pages, including the section titled Emotional Leverage. Claire arrived a few minutes later. She looked tired, but composed. We nodded at each other. Dr. Sohn welcomed us both, and we sat down on opposite sides of a round table, which I had always thought was a smart design choice. No head of the table, no power position. Dr. Sohn explained the format. She asked if either of us had anything to raise before we began. I said yes. I placed the folder on the table. I did not raise my voice. I did not perform anything. I simply explained in plain language what had happened. I said that someone who had presented himself as a neutral friend to both parties had been, in my view, actively coaching one side of this mediation. I said I had evidence of this. I said I was not raising it to create drama, but because it was directly relevant to the integrity of the process we were about to undertake, and because I believed Claire deserved to know. I slid the settlement notes document across the table to Dr. Sohn first. She read the title. She read the first page. Her expression did not change, but she became very still in the way that people become still when they are thinking carefully. Then I slid a copy to Claire. Claire picked it up. She read the title. She read the first paragraph. I watched her face. I want to be fair here. What I saw was not the face of someone who had known all along and was now caught. What I saw was something more complicated. I saw recognition, yes, but I also saw something that looked like embarrassment, and then something that looked like anger. Not at me. At him. She put the document down. She said quietly, "Where did you get this?" I said, "He sent it to me by accident." She said, "When?" I said, "January the 3rd. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He told me you two were not really talking much, that you had kind of pulled away." I said, "We met at the Copper Rail 2 weeks ago. He bought the first round." She closed her eyes briefly. Then she opened them and looked at Dr. Sohn and said, "I would like a few minutes." Dr. Sohn said, "Of course." We took a break. I went to the small waiting area and looked out the window at the street. It was a cold, grey Thursday. A man was walking a very large dog that was moving much faster than he wanted to. I watched them until they turned the corner. When we reconvened, the dynamic in the room had shifted completely. Claire told Dr. Sohn that she had been receiving information about the mediation process from a mutual friend, and that she had believed this friend was helping her understand her position and better. She said she had not known the information was coming from confidential conversations with me. She said, and I believed her, that she had assumed Marcus had his own knowledge of the situation from his own perspective, not that he was relaying my private disclosures. Dr. Sohn handled this with the professionalism of someone who had seen most things. She noted the situation, noted that it would need to be addressed outside this room, and suggested we proceed with a clean slate and with the understanding that any prior information Claire had received through this channel should be set aside entirely. Claire agreed. I agreed. We spent the next 3 hours working through the actual substance of our separation. It was not easy, but it was honest. And somewhere in the middle of it, I realized that the version of Claire I was sitting across from was not the version that had been armed and strategically coached. She was just a woman who was also tired, also wanted it to be over, and was also, in her own way, figuring out who she could trust. By the time we left Dr. Sohn's office, we had a working framework. Not a final agreement, but a real one. Something built on actual ground. Now. Marcus. I did not call him that evening. I let him sit with his Tuesday text, his good luck for Wednesday, his confidence that the version of me he had constructed, the slightly overwhelmed, emotionally exploitable man processing his divorce at the Copper Rail, was still walking around in the world, none the wiser. I waited until the weekend. On Saturday afternoon, I sent Marcus a message. Just 3 sentences. I said, "The mediation was Thursday, not Wednesday. I found the document you accidentally sent. I would like to have this conversation in person." There was a long pause. Then, "What document? What are you talking about?" I sent him the screenshot of the email with the attachment visible. I sent him the screenshot of his calendar entries. Lunch C, coffee C. I sent him a screenshot of one of the forwarded emails where I had shared information that later appeared in Claire's arguments almost verbatim. Another long pause. Then, "It is not what you think." I replied, "I will be at the Copper Rail at 4. He showed up. I will give him that. He showed up, and he sat down across from me, and for a moment I saw him try to arrange his face into something that looked like injured innocence. The look of a man who has been misunderstood and is patiently waiting to explain. I put the printed folder on the table between us, the same folder I had brought to mediation. I did not open it. I just put it there. I said, I am not here to fight. I am here to close something. He said, you have taken this completely out of context. I said, the document is titled Settlement Notes, C. It has a section called Emotional Leverage. What context am I missing? He shifted. He said, I was trying to help Claire understand the process. She was panicking. She did not know what she was doing. I was just trying to be supportive. I said, using things I told you in confidence. He said, you were talking to me as a friend. I was trying to protect both of you. I said, the section called Emotional Leverage. Walk me through how that protects me. He did not answer that. He looked at the folder. He looked at the table. He said, I have known you for 17 years. I said, I know. He said, I made a mistake. I got too involved. I thought I was helping, and I went too far. I am sorry. And here's the thing about that apology. It was probably the most honest thing he had said to me in months. I think some part of it was real, but it was also, and I could see this clearly sitting across from him in the bar we had been coming to for years, still a performance, still the Marcus move, the right words at the right moment. The pivot to vulnerability when the position becomes indefensible. I said, I appreciate that. I do. But I need you to understand something. This is not a fight I want to win. I am not trying to punish you. I am telling you that this is finished. You and me. This is the last time we sit here. He said, you are serious. I said, I have never been more serious about anything in a very calm way. He tried a few more angles. He said I was being extreme. He said I was letting the stress of the divorce make me paranoid. He said he had always been there for me, that one mistake did not erase 17 years. He said as Clara had come to him first, not the other way around, as if the direction of the first contact changed what he had done with it. I let him talk. I did not argue. I did not add to the folder on the table. I just waited until he ran out of angles. Then I said, I am going to go now. I wish you well. I mean that. I left the folder on the table. All 4 pages of settlement notes. See the calendar screenshots, the email chain. I left it there because I did not need it anymore. I had already used it where it mattered, and I thought there was something appropriate about leaving it in the place where he had performed friendship for me so many times. Let him sit with it. Let him decide what to do with it. I walked out of the copper rail and stood on the pavement for a moment in the cold. A January afternoon, grey sky, the sound of traffic. I put my hands in my coat pockets and found in the left one a bottle cap. From the last time we had been there, probably. One of those small physical objects that accumulates in coat pockets without you noticing. I held it for a second, then I dropped it in the bin on the corner. The social fallout happened gradually, and I want to be honest, I did not engineer it. I did not go on a campaign. I did not send screenshots to our friend group with a cover letter explaining what Marcus had done. What I did was tell the truth when people asked. And people asked because Marcus started telling his version first. His version was that I had become paranoid and difficult during the divorce, that I had misinterpreted things, that I had pushed him away when he was only trying to help. He told this version to several people in our shared social circle. He told it confidently in his particular way, with the right amount of regret and the right amount of wounded dignity. The problem was that several of those same people had already heard from Claire. Claire, it turned out, was angrier at Marcus than I was, because she had trusted him too, because she had believed he was giving her genuine insight, not feeding her a curated version of my vulnerabilities. Because she had gone into a mediation session with information she thought was helpful, and it had been built on a foundation of betrayal that she had not signed up for. She did not go on a campaign either, but she told the truth when people asked. And the truth, from both sides of the same story, is a difficult thing to argue against. Marcus's position as the steady centre, the wise, neutral friend, the man everyone called in a crisis. It depended entirely on both sides of any conflict trusting him. Once both sides compared notes, there was nothing left to stand on. I heard, through people we both knew, that he tried to reframe it as a misunderstanding for several weeks. Then he went quiet. Then he stopped showing up to the regular group dinners. Then he moved to a different part of the city, which I do not think was directly connected, but the timing was what it was. The social world he had spent years positioning himself at the centre of simply closed around the space where he used to stand. I do not know what his life looks like now. I am not tracking it. That is not indifference. It is just that I genuinely have other things to pay attention to, The divorce was finalised in April. Claire and I split the apartment equity fairly. We used the framework from the mediation session, the honest one, the one built after the document on the table had cleared the air. We were not warm with each other by the end, but we were decent. We shook hands outside Dr. Sohn's office on the day we signed the final agreement, and it was the kind of handshake that means something is actually over. I think about the wedding sometimes, not with bitterness, mostly. I think about the moment the boutonniere fell off my lapel and Marcus caught it without even looking, because he was already watching, already positioned, already aware of the space around him. I thought at the time that it was the action of a good friend, someone present and attentive. Now, I think it was just who he was. A man who was always watching, always positioned, always aware of what he could use. But here is what I have been sitting with since all of this ended. The betrayal was real. The friendship was also real. Those two things can coexist, and that is the part that does not resolve cleanly. Marcus was not a villain from the beginning. I do not think he woke up one day and decided to become a double agent in my divorce. I think he got involved, and then more involved, and then found himself in a position where he was useful to Claire in ways that felt like importance, like centrality, like being needed. And I think he liked being needed more than he liked being honest. That is a human failure, a significant one, with real consequences. But it is not a movie villain's plan. It is something messier and more recognizable than that. What I did, in the months after all of this, was go through my friendships the way you go through a closet when you are moving. Carefully, deliberately, asking for each one. Does this still fit? Is this something I chose or something I accumulated? Is this person someone I trust with the actual weight of my life? Or just someone I'm comfortable with because they have always been there? It's a different question than the one most people ask about friendships. Most people ask, is this a good person? Is this person fun to be around? Do we have history? I started asking, does this person know the difference between my confidence and their leverage? Some friendships survived that question easily. A few did not make it through, and those endings were quieter and less dramatic than the Marcus situation. But they were real. I did not perform anger about them. I just let them be what they were. I also started being more careful about what I process out loud, and with whom. Not because I became closed off. I do not think I did. But because I got clearer about the difference between a friend and a sounding board, and the difference between vulnerability and exposure. You can be open with people. You can trust people. But trust is specific, not general. It is earned in particular ways by particular people. And it does not transfer automatically because someone has been around for a long time. 17 years of history is not the same as 17 years of trustworthiness. I know that now. The apartment I shared with Claire sold in June. I moved into a smaller place on the other side of the city. It took me a while to get used to the quiet. The first few weeks I kept reaching for my phone to send a voice note to Marcus about whatever I was processing and then remembering. That reflex took longer to go away than the anger did. But it went away. I bought a plant for the new apartment. Just one. A large leafy thing that sits in the corner by the window and seems, against all odds, to be doing well. I am not a plant person. I have never been a plant person. But there is something about having one living thing in a space that you are responsible for, something that does not require explanation or history or performance, something that just needs water and light and consistency. I am good at consistency. I always have been. The mediation folder is in a drawer somewhere. I do not look at it. I kept it because you keep documents, not because I need to revisit it. The evidence served its purpose. It was never really about punishment. It was about clarity, about walking into a room where I was supposed to be at a disadvantage and making sure the ground was level before anything else happened. Marcus lost the thing he valued most, the story of himself, the wise, neutral, steady center, the man who could navigate both sides of a conflict and come out looking like a peacemaker. That story required both sides to believe it simultaneously. Once Claire and I compared notes, the story collapsed. And you can rebuild a lot of things in life, but it is very hard to rebuild a reputation built on a lie once the lie is visible to everyone who mattered. I do not take pleasure in that, but I do not pretend it did not happen either. What I take from all of this, the marriage, the separation, the betrayal, the mediation, the whole long, complicated year of it, is something simple enough to fit in a sentence. Know who is in your corner and know what being in your corner actually means. Not who says they are in your corner. Not who has been around long enough that you have stopped questioning it. Not who performs friendship well enough that you confuse the performance for the real thing. Know who, when the weight is real and the stakes are real, is actually there for you and not for the advantage of knowing you. That list, when you make it honestly, is usually shorter than you think. But shorter is fine. Shorter is actually better. Shorter means you know exactly what you have. I walked out of the copper rail on that January afternoon and stood in the cold and dropped a bottle cap in a bin on the corner. A small thing, the kind of thing you carry around without meaning to, and then one day you just let go of it. I went home. I made dinner. I sat at my kitchen table and ate it quietly, alone, in my own apartment, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Not happy, exactly. Not relieved, though there was some of that, something more foundational than either of those. I felt like I was standing on solid ground, and that, after a year of feeling like everything under my feet was shifting, was more than enough.